Welcome to Tucker Carlson Today. 2 words, Tulsi Gabbard. If you watch our show, if you watch television, if you live in this country, of course you know who she is. She is a former member of Congress from Hawaii. She ran for president last cycle. She's also a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves. We are always grateful to have her, particularly for an hour. This is something we've been thinking about for a long time, but our paths have not intersected, being at opposite ends of the country. So we are especially grateful to say that she's with us in studio now. Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Great to see you. So normally when we talk, it's about the issue of the day. And I want to get to that because it's an overriding issue. It's the war underway in Ukraine. But I just cannot resist noting the passage of time and how much has changed by playing a clip about you. This is Suzanne Melvo from CNN, who's reporter there, or was anyway, describing you during your first congressional campaign, 2012. Just to set the scene in one sentence. This is CNN talking about Tulsi Gabbard. Listen to the tone they use. Watch.
Tulsi Gabbard, she is going to be the one to watch tonight at the DNC. She is only 31 years old. She is not only a veteran of the Iraq War, she has served on the Honolulu City Council, and she is also now congressional candidate for her state of Hawaii. Tulsi joined the House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, several other women on stage tonight, and she joins us now. It is so nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
I cannot tell you how many people have mentioned your name and said this is the one to look out for. Tell us why. I mean, people see you as a rising star.
Okay, so that was the summer of 2012. They've never been more excited about someone than they were about you. That's the Democratic Party's TV network. Let's fast forward just 7 years, not that far. This is October of 2019. This is the head of the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton, describing the very same person, Tulsi Gabbard.
Clinton said, quote, they're grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far. Clinton was referring to the fact that the Hawaii Congresswoman gets a lot of attention from Kremlin-linked media.
I've never seen a faster change ever in my life with anybody. You went from being the #1 most promising Democrat in the House of Representatives to being a traitor to your own country, a Russian spy. Like, what the hell in 7 years? How did that happen?
That's a great question. I think it points to, in all seriousness, kind of the culture in Washington.
Yes.
Where it's the team spirit. It's you're either on our team or you're not. You're either towing the party line or the company line or you're not. And if you dare to challenge, if you dare to question, if you dare to speak the truth about what's happening, the challenges we face, I think that's where you see that kind of shift occur.
Shift? With your signature understatement, yes, a shift. I mean, I've never seen anything like that.
But you know, Tucker, I mean, obviously, like you've lived and been in around D.C. forever.
Yeah.
You know what a popularity contest it is, both within the political circles, but also the media circles, where rather than people actually focusing on their responsibility to the public, to the people, if you're an elected official, to be their voice, to serve their interests and put their interests and our country first, or from the media perspective as a journalist, to always put the truth and presenting the truth to the people as kind of that paramount responsibility you have on both of those fronts. You and I know very well that is not the acceptable culture in Washington, because if you do those things and you go against the grain of what people view as cool or what the narrative of the day is, that is dictated by the power elite, both within politics and mainstream media, then immediately you become an outcast. You become otherized. You become smeared or even silenced and censored in this age of cancel culture. And I've had better than front row seats to this. I've obviously lived it and experienced it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I mean, they literally accuse you of betraying the country that you currently serve in uniform.
Yes.
It's the heaviest possible charge. In fact, if proven, it's a death penalty offense. So that's a very strong thing for the head of the party to say. Maybe this is why nobody disobeys.
Yes. And not only do they don't disobey, but through all of, from the point that Hillary Clinton said that, which, by the way, this whole thing started the very day I announced my candidacy to run for president. It started the very day that I announced my race, and it was never questioned. There wasn't a single journalist that said, well, Hillary Clinton or any one of the other kind of talking heads representing
downstream from her.
Exactly. Everybody got the talking points because it proliferated very quickly. No one questioned, like, where is your evidence of this? You're talking about a sitting member of Congress on the Armed Services Committee with access to some of the highest level of security classified information relating to our country's national security, someone who wears our country in uniform, who's put her life on the line for our country, and you're making the most serious accusation one could make. Where's the proof?
Exactly.
It never happened.
I forgot you were the Armed Services Committee. That just adds another layer of like insanity to this.
It does.
So before I get to the substance of all of this, like, how did that affect you? You clearly weren't who could expect something like that? First of all, you're from Hawaii.
No.
Which is a state, but it's very far away, farther than people realize. Did you know that Washington was like this?
No.
Yeah.
No. I came in both to Congress as well as even coming into my campaign for president with the hope of the opportunity of being able to speak to the American people, to be able to present these issues that drove me to run for president, that drove me to run for Congress, of having served on 2 deployments to the Middle East, of understanding in the most deep and visceral way the cost of war. And the responsibility, the most important responsibility that any president has, is to serve as commander-in-chief and make these decisions that directly impact my brothers and sisters in uniform. I served in a medical unit during my first deployment, where every single day I was confronted with that human cost of war. I had to go through a list every day of every casualty and injury of any American in operating in Iraq during that time. And knowing that behind every one of those names was one of my brothers and sisters in uniform, with family members and loved ones at home. Some who would never, ever be able to say their last and final goodbye. They are the ones who I have kept with me since I came home and throughout all of my efforts to say we need to have leaders who are making responsible decisions about our foreign policy, about where and when our troops are sent into combat, about understanding the need to say, hey, before we do anything, we need to understand, we need a clear objective. We need to know what we are trying to accomplish and why, and does it serve the best interests of the American people, our country, and our national security? Know that we can actually accomplish this objective. So often we've seen failures, costly failures, both to the American people and in other countries, with one regime change war after the next, where our leaders fail to ask and answer these very basic questions that I can tell you a young lieutenant in the military knows. You don't launch an operation until you know what is your objective, build your strategy, a winnable strategy to accomplish that objective, and understand, does it serve our best interests of the uniform that we wear and the flag that we wear on our shoulder?
These are baseline considerations.
Basic.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. So all of this happens to you, then you run for president. What's that like, and how does it change your view?
I think it, again, I went into that campaign understanding and looking forward to the opportunity to be able to speak to the American people about these issues that I'm talking about. And frankly, was surprised that from day one, the fix was in. From day one, that decision was made to immediately start the smear campaign, where if they weren't kind of blacking me out of media coverage as a candidate running for president, the stories were largely trying to smear my character and create this false, like, suspicious caricature of me to the American people before I even had the opportunity to introduce myself.
Super personal stuff, too.
Very
attacking
deeply
your
personal.
family. I remember that. I remember thinking, boy, they're going all out.
And that's what made me realize 2 things. Number one, just at a personal level, I felt like I was out in the ocean with a rowboat facing a naval armada of gunships.
That's about right.
That's literally what it felt like. And it just made me realize, well, first of all, I did not have the money, the resources, the means to be able to even begin to compete in that battle. which really goes to the second point, which is
right. You're one of the only non-rich people to run for president in a while.
That's a generous statement. But it just goes to show who holds the power in these elections, and this is the biggest threat to our democratic republic. Is you have the mainstream media, you have big tech, especially Google, who are really controlling what information any voter in this country has access to when it comes to our elections. Where and we experienced this during my campaign. After the first debate, I was the most searched candidate of the night.
Yeah. Who
is Tulsi Gabbard? We were hoping that would be the case, so we kind of had all of our Google ads and everything set up so that people would be able to find me when they searched. That happened, but for some reason, our Google Ads account was suspended.
No way.
At that time. So again, who controls this? Google controls when you type something into the search engine, right? Their algorithms, if we have no visibility, there's no transparency over that, but they get to choose whether it's around a candidate or an issue or something in the news. They control what you or I see at any given moment when we type that into the search engine, and therefore control the information and the ability for people to make a clear and informed decision for ourselves in the United States of America. This is the great challenge that we're facing.
On what grounds, not to be literal, I mean, I know in real life what the grounds were. They hated your message, okay? You stepped on the red line, which is war, of course, more than any other topic. But on what, literal grounds did they suspend your Google Ads?
They wouldn't tell us. They didn't even make a story up. That's the thing. We had our tech guys, they were freaking out. They're trying to figure this out. They were calling helplines and customer service, and we didn't get a response for a long time.
Customer service.
Magically, really, Tucker, magically, after a period of time had passed, our account was reinstated with no explanation, no apology, no, oops, sorry, we made a mistake, didn't mean to, nothing at all. It's like the switch was just flipped.
Google just doesn't think you should be president, so.
But really, that's the point. That is the point. That we have people in these positions of great power who control the information that the American people have access to. And that whole experience of recognizing how there are just a handful of people in our country, in the mainstream media, in big tech, kind of the deep state, who are the ones who control this thing that we call a democracy.
So how is it a democracy if people who are not accountable, whose names aren't even known, can shut down a presidential campaign?
Exactly. And that's the reality that I became very keenly aware of, and understand that whether it's for me or someone else who were to run again, knowing that this is what you're up against, you've got to be able to have the money, the means, and the tools to make it so that we're not completely dependent on the media to be able to reach voters. There are other access and other means, but just having a very clear-eyed vision of this is what you're up against.
It's interesting. I don't want to get too personal, but I happen to know this, that you haven't cashed in and become like a rich person. You're one of the most famous members. No, it's actually true. So fame equals money. You're one of the most famous former members of Congress. It's just true. And you fly commercial. So was that interesting? You're clearly not focused on money, obviously, but was that interesting when you show up in Washington and notice that all your colleagues have actually kind of cashed in and they're rich people? Was that weird?
It was interesting to witness. I think there's just an important difference between people who go to Washington and who really get caught up in kind of the so-called glamour and glitz and glitter, and it's a bad thing that this culture in Washington exists. And I experienced it almost my first trip there. I wasn't even sworn in yet. They had a new members of Congress freshman orientation. There was a big reception, and I remember I was like, oh, I'm thirsty. I'm gonna go get water. Went and stood in line to go and get something to drink. And somebody saw my name tag and they're like, oh, hi, Congresswoman, welcome to Washington. How are you? Whatever, started talking you shouldn't be waiting in line. I was like, what are you talking about? There's a line. I'm going to wait in line. And this person said, Congresswoman, you need to understand that in this town, you will never wait in line again.
Whoa.
That was the first thing. The second thing was I was making my way through the Capitol, kind of trying to figure out where I had to go and which halls to take. And I asked a Capitol Security, Capitol Police, like, hey, can you point me in the right direction? I'm trying to figure out where I'm going. And she's like, yeah, I'll just walk you down. I'm going that way. And I was, all right, cool. So we started talking, and I was like, man, there's like 90 new members of Congress here. We must be driving you crazy. She's like, you know what? We don't mind you guys right now. In 3 months, half of you won't even say hello to us when you walk in the door because you're going to feel like you're too important. And these things kind of set the tone for me from the beginning of recognizing people who go there and kind of feel like they shine in the so-called glory of being a member of Congress and unfortunately forget who they actually work for, that the people who voted for us and who sent us there, those are the people that we are accountable to. Those are the people who we should be thinking of at every minute of every day that we are on that job. And I'm, I hate all that stuff, Tucker.
Yeah,
I hate the
tell.
parties. I hate the dinners. I hate all the schmoozing and all the other things. The thing that has always driven me and that I've recognized even from a really young age, the thing that makes me most happy and most fulfilled is when I can be of service to others.
Yes.
When I can be in a position to actually help someone, whether it's in a small way or a big way, it doesn't matter. That is where I have and continue to draw my fulfillment, and that's why I'm still poor.
No, I love that because it's people can say whatever they want, but look at how they live. That's how you know who they are.
Yeah.
And you have not cashed in, and I think it's really admirable. Did you meet anyone out of the other 434 serving in Congress who you thought were there for the right reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. And on both sides of the aisle. Unfortunately, it is the exception rather than the rule, and that was the thing that I think it gets easy, unfortunately, for people to get caught up in the two parties battling against each other.
Yeah.
During that freshman orientation, the first couple of days, it was all of us were together going through like the ethics training and the this and the that. And then there was a very clear line of demarcation that occurred within that first week where Democrats went with the Democrats and Republicans went with the Republicans. And we kind of, I made friends with a few people over that first week and we were sharing notes and we were both kind of getting the same messages that, all right, now you're here, you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. We don't want you working with people on the other side because that might help them get reelected when our goal is to beat them rather than actually get things done. That we were supposed to see them as the bad guys. It just this culture of tribalism, of divisiveness was kind of dictated to us from the outset. And myself and a couple of others were like, no, that's crap. Like, I didn't come here to work for a party. This is about us taking an oath of office to the Constitution, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, to serve our constituents, to represent the American people, not the Democratic Party and not the Republican Party. And so the people that I was naturally more drawn to were people who actually took that to heart rather than just trying to play the game of how do you climb the political ladder to get more power, more attention, more fame, at the cost of delivering results and service to the American people.
How much have you thought about why you became the focus of so much intra-party rage? Like why the leadership of the party decided you were like the worst person in America and should be deported? I mean, it does seem like there's still some diversity of views within the parties. There are certainly Republicans who disagree with Republicans on certain issues. Also true of the Democratic Party. There are some Democrats who are like pro-Second Amendment. Not all, but they still exist. Somehow you picked a topic that like they couldn't accept at all. Why?
For so long, even as the Democratic Party and Republican Party have had differences, there has too often been no space between the leaders of both parties when it comes to war.
Yeah.
When it comes to the stranglehold that the military-industrial complex has over politicians. President Eisenhower warned against this in his farewell speech, and his warning has unfortunately rung true and continues to ring true today. We saw how after President Trump was elected and there were missiles being launched towards Syria, you had the talking heads on mainstream media, Democrat leaders and Republican leaders, saying things like, well, finally, this is the first time President Trump is acting like a true president.
Exactly.
And
the dumbest thing he did is the only thing they ever complimented.
And this points to this sickness that exists within our leaders. And this is why I ran for president, because for myself, for others who truly know the cost of war, it is sickening and angering to see these people in the most powerful positions in our country treating so lightly the decision to go to war, whether they're trying to look tough or act tough or get points in, the polls or win the next election or distract the American people from the crappy job they're doing at home to say, hey, we've got to come together around this. Whatever the motivation, whatever the reason, we're talking about people's lives. My brothers and sisters who wear this uniform, who stand ready at a moment's notice to go and deploy for the purpose of keeping the American people safe, finding peace in the knowledge that if I deploy, I might not come home. And I'm okay with that because I love this country. And yet you have politicians who play games with these great Americans and their willingness and their families' willingness to lay it all on the line for our country, for our rights, for our freedom of speech. And as much as I despise all of the political gamesmanship and everything else that's going on, this is what drives me to continue to remain engaged, to continue to speak the truth, to try to bring voice to so many who don't feel that their voices are being heard.
But what's so crazy, you're obviously not a Quaker. You serve in the U.S. military.
Yeah.
So you recognize that under certain circumstances, war is the only option. Obviously, you've been there. But you're not in the wake of Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya and all the many debacles we've all watched on television over the last 20 years. You're making a pretty moderate case. I mean, isn't your case just let's not do something stupid?
Yes. Put very simply.
So
it's striking that balance between making sure that we have a strong national defense, that our men and women in uniform are trained, they are ready, and that they have what they need in order to be able to serve our country when and where needed. Combine that and balance that with the need for our political leaders to see the world as it is through a realistic lens, not some fantasy world that we wished existed or some fantasy conditions that we hope might be in place, but see the world with a realistic view and have the strength to be able to make those decisions based on, is this mission in the best interest of our country's security and the American people? And if it is not, have the strength to exercise restraint, to make sure that we're recognizing both the short-term and long-term consequences of that decision, whichever way it may be, serves the interests of our people. It's as simple as that. It's not this is the thing, as soon as Tulsi Gabbard is against regime change war. She must be an isolationist. She wants to, kind of have America turn our back to the world. This is a tactic of those who are neocons and neolibs who try to mischaracterize this balanced approach to exercising a strong national defense while also exercising restraint, which is what a responsible leader should do.
God, it's so shocking to me that you almost never hear anyone articulate it as clearly as you just did, since that should be on the tips of every leader's tongue, right there, which is exactly what you just said. And that, too, it's considered so controversial. Is it that you're saying that out loud points up their failure? Is that what it is? Because clearly they didn't do what you just said.
It exposes where their loyalties really lie, to get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
Where they're making decisions that will turn out to be big paydays for the military-industrial complex, these big defense contractors who are making a ton of money already off of this new Cold War we are in. It exposes the fact that their loyalty is not the thing that it should be at the foremost of their mind and their decision making is not what's in the best interest of the American people. It's not what's in the best interest of our national security. And we know this is not just me saying this. We can look time and time and time again throughout history, these decisions have been made that have actually undermined our national security,
yes,
made us less safe, cost us great cost, both in lives as well as in taxpayer dollars. You look at, Afghanistan's a good example. You look at Syria. Syria's one where, early on in the Trump administration, actually right after he got elected, as I was looking at Syria, I found that, hey, there's a U.S. program paid for by taxpayers that is actually arming and providing support to al-Qaeda in Syria. Why? Because the objective was not to defeat al-Qaeda, but to overthrow the government of Syria, the Assad regime in Syria. I enlisted in the military after 9/11 to go after those al-Qaeda Islamist terrorists who attacked us on that day, who want to see their ideology spread around the world, who want to create these caliphates of Islamism. And yet we have politicians who are using taxpayer dollars to provide them with arms, to strengthen them and to support them so they could go over and topple this dictator that we don't like. I met with President Trump shortly after he got elected, talked to him about this and talked to him about the fact that, hey, I'm going to be introducing legislation to stop arming terrorists, which is exactly what I did. Started taking it around to my colleagues. There were a small handful in the House of Representatives, Democrats and Republicans, who joined me on this. And there was one senator who agreed to do it, and that was Rand Paul. I took it to Bernie Sanders, took it to others, people who I thought, like, hey, if there's one thing that we can stand together on, it's to support this one page of legislation
that says Al-Qaeda.
Stop arming terrorists. That's literally what the bill was called, the Stop Arming Terrorists Act. Why was it so controversial that the vast majority of Congress found it too hot to touch? They couldn't and didn't want to add
What's the answer?
their names to it. The answer is they're more interested in waging regime change wars than they are about actually defeating the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. The ones that every year on 9/11 anniversary, politicians across the country stand up at their podiums and talk about how we have to defeat those who attacked us. We can never forget the threat that they pose. Who's actually doing something about it? But this is what I'm talking about in Washington. You've got politicians who have all this lip service when it comes down to the core of actually taking action to serve our national security interests, to go after and defeat those who attacked us on 9/11. Where are they?
It's just so funny how these decisions are made and then the consensus becomes mandatory on these questions. I remember missing the memo about Assad. I never had any feelings about Assad one way or the other. But it's a super complicated part of the world. Nobody seems very good to me. They all seem very tainted. And here you had this guy, Assad, who at least protected the Christian minority in the country. I'm a Christian, so that seems like a fair thing to think is good. And those are basically the strengths of my feelings about it. I didn't have strong feelings. But all of a sudden I learned that to say what I just said out loud is like an act of disloyalty against my own country.
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. I think that is a great example, and there are others that are playing out as we speak, where even questioning a regime change war, questioning our being involved with one conflict or another when it comes to this issue of war. Those who dare to challenge whether or not it serves our country's best interests are immediately smeared or canceled or mischaracterized or silenced. And it goes to the powers that be, who have their own agenda that is not the agenda of the American people.
Okay, but I've always wondered this about you. You've been called traitor so often, even as you serve in the United States military and served in the U.S. Congress, which is its own real kind of service because it's just so awful. The people are so awful. You're taking a huge financial hit. You're commuting from Hawaii to Washington. Like, you're actually sacrificing. How does that make you feel? When, like, Alexander Vindman's wife calls you an effing traitor, like, does that get to you? You always seem so calm. Makes me mad even telling you.
It makes me sad.
Okay.
It really makes me sad. My commitment to serving our country has never wavered. I know who I am, and I know why I do what I do. It makes me sad to see how our country is being torn apart, and that people who have these platforms are so irresponsible and destructive in how they're using them. It does not serve anyone's interests but their own.
But you don't lie in bed feeling rage about it.
No, I try to be constructive. I try to be constructive with my energy, and if I got to let off a little steam, I'll go surfing, get in the ocean, come out. I feel good, but really just try to focus my energy on how and where I can be that voice of truth, be that voice of reason, be that voice of restraint that I hope emboldens more people to be more thoughtful, to question more, to challenge more, and not just accept things at face value.
I'm glad, because clearly your strength is your balance and your healthy outlook. And the second they get in your head and turn you into a hater, then you're weak and tormented. No, I think that's absolutely good for you.
And it also just says that I actually care about what they think, and I don't. I really don't.
I see your husband's laughing off camera. Yeah, that's nice. No, that's a wonderful quality. So what is the Russia stuff? So they started so early, actually, that I was confused by it. Really? Tulsi Gabbard's a Russian agent? Why that? Like, what is your view of Russia, and why do they say that? And what is that?
Oh, well, I mean, to me, again, as you look at it over time, and I don't think I recognized this from the beginning, because I was also like, where's this coming from?
Right,
I had
it's so bizarre.
No idea. But over time, you've seen how it has become this easily kind of thrown about, name-calling tactic given to anybody who disagrees with kind of the mainstream establishment, especially amongst the Democratic Party. And it just, I mean, I can't even explain it to you, because it doesn't make any sense at all. What I have talked about over and over and over again, every day that I was on the campaign trail as I was running for president, was the great danger that we face in going into a new Cold War against Russia, a nuclear armed country, is this existential threat of nuclear war, that there are consequences to continuing down this path that we are on. So as far as what I'm talking about is really the true existential threat that we face, and which throughout the campaign, and really even still, as this threat is continuing to increase, the media refused to talk about it. I brought it up in debates. I brought it up in my town halls. I brought it up in interviews with the media, and oftentimes really physically got an eye roll reaction, with a reporter even once asking, like, why do you keep talking about this?
About nuclear war?
Yeah, about the reality of where a new Cold War can lead us. And I think they're afraid of how real this threat is. I think it shows that they didn't want to engage on actual substance. They wanted to continue with kind of the political theater of who doesn't like who, or who's attacking who, or all the crap that you kind of saw throughout those debates. But when confronted with a very real question, you hear this term existential threat thrown about all the time, whether it's talking about climate change or this or that. You hear people talk about existential threats seemingly from all directions. But the threat of nuclear war is it is the great existential threat that we face, even more so now than in the last Cold War that we're in. And yet, who's actually talking about it?
No one, ever.
No one. Exactly.
Ever. Never. And I'm much older than you, but when I was a kid, like in the 70s, people worried about that, and they talked about it all the time. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, I mean, that was like, I was 10. People talked about it.
Yeah.
I cannot remember the first time you mentioned that on our show. I remember thinking, wow, that's kind of a far out thing to say. Yeah. And then I thought, why is that far out?
Right.
Is this something that, since you've served in the Congress, is this something that people in armed services worry about, talk about?
Too few and not often enough. I come at this from a personal place. I wasn't I wasn't one of those kids that had to go and do, kind of nuclear attack drills in school. That was not my experience. And growing up in Hawaii, frankly, I didn't have any kind of connection to that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was what our sirens went off for. But for us in January of 2018, our alarm system went off early one Saturday morning with text alerts going off to everyone's cell phones all across the state saying, missile incoming to Hawaii, seek shelter immediately.
Yes,
this is not a drill.
I remember this.
That was truly a wake-up call for me and everyone who went through that, and people who were watching this happen at that moment, where we thought we had minutes to live before
from North Korea.
Hawaii would be destroyed. Exactly, an attack from North Korea. And so, there was, this father who was lowering his little girl, 7 years old, 8 years old, down a manhole, telling her, honey, be safe, and saying his goodbye, not knowing if that would be the last time he'd ever see her. I had people calling me saying that I took my kids and we hid in the bathtub. Another guy who's a father, he had one child who was in town, the other child who was an hour away on the other side of the island, and he was trying to make that impossible decision. You're a father, you understand, which of my kids do I go and spend the last minutes of my life with? This was the reality that we faced. And so when we talk about this existential threat of nuclear war, it's real, man. It's real. And something that makes it even more dangerous today for us as a country and frankly the world is because so many people don't understand the seriousness of this threat. We have leaders who don't understand on the Armed Services Committee, on the Foreign Affairs Committees, who speak about this in such a light way and so dangerously, in fact, that as they're making their calculations about decision making and their war games, instead of recognizing the truth that no one wins in the event of nuclear war, it results in destruction of the world as we know it. Instead, they're talking about, you know what, we need to build smaller nuclear weapons. They call them tactical nuclear weapons, low yield nuclear weapons, because maybe we can just have these little mini nuclear wars and think that that is not going to result in the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, which is the reality. So they're taking lightly the fact that this is an existential threat and that once it begins, it's game over for all of us. Something I read this morning, and I was shocked. I wanted to tell you about it. I went to ready.gov. Ready.gov is a website that the federal government puts out that says, well, in the event of all these different kinds of disasters, here's the things that you can do to take care of yourselves and your family. They have a tab on there of what to do in the event of a nuclear attack. I read it and I wanted to laugh, but it was so bad that it pissed me off. Because it was exactly what we went through in Hawaii. They're like, if there's a nuclear attack coming, go into the middle of a building or find a basement. It should be brick or cement. Wait there and hopefully you have water to last you 24 hours. When you're done, make sure you take a shower to wash off any radiation. Nuclear fallout might come, so be careful of that. Like the blasé way that they're talking. I'm serious. I'm not even joking. You can go and look it up.
So dark.
The way that they're talking about this is not only, it makes light of the reality. It gives people this false sense of security that, oh yeah, okay, nuclear attack, no big deal. Just go in the middle of a building and you'll be okay. When in reality, all of these politicians, these people will be alive and thriving and well in their bunkers, keeping themselves safe, while the rest of us have no place to go. So in Hawaii, they said, oh, take shelter immediately. This is not a drill. We didn't know where to go. Nobody knew where to go. There's no shelter. There's no shelter that'll protect you from the nuclear blast, from the fallout that will come, from the nuclear winter that comes, from the fact that food, crops, en masse will all be dead. We won't have food to eat. We won't have clean water to drink. All of this making light of the seriousness of the threat that we face, which just makes it even more dangerous that whether it's intentional or a miscalculation, that we could end up in this place of massive destruction.
I always believe that the fundamentals are the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And the farther we get from that, the worse our decision making is likely to be. So with what you just said in mind, assess our response to the invasion of Ukraine by the Russians, which I think everyone acknowledges is destabilizing and bad, but we have an obligation to respond wisely, are we?
No. I think that obviously what Putin is doing is absolutely terrible. This war is a tragedy. His attack and invasion into Ukraine should not have happened, and it needs to stop. When we look at the responsibility that leaders, President Biden, leaders of NATO, Putin, Zelensky, the leaders of the world have, is to think about what is in the best interest of the people, to find a way to sit down and negotiate an end to this war, rather than making their decisions based on their geopolitical chest thumping. Because it is the people who are really the pawns who are suffering as a result of their so-called power plays. This is what needs to happen, and it needs to happen now, because as many people as have been killed already, as many people who are suffering already, as much destruction as there has already been, this is still very small in comparison to the destruction that and death and suffering that we will continue to see the longer this goes
That's exactly right. Not all war is the same. The invasion of Grenada is not the same as Stalingrad. Like, there are degrees of badness.
It's not. And that's where, going back to the reality of this existential threat of nuclear war, it is not inevitable. It is not inevitable. It requires strong leadership, again, to recognize, okay, how did we get to this position? And to do what is necessary to start to say, okay, yes, recognize the seriousness of the threat, bring together the different leaders, bring together people who can come and start to renegotiate those treaties that used to be in place to de-escalate the threat of nuclear war, to take us farther back away from that brink. Strong leadership is required, and it's required now. The path forward can be laid, but it's going to require people who are putting the interests of the people, the American people, the Ukrainian people, the Russian people, the people of the world, putting the interests of the people first.
So let's just assess a specific proposition, proposal, response to the invasion. This clip comes from Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois from 4 days ago, but he speaks for many in the United States Congress when he says this.
I think this is time where we need to, at the invitation of Ukraine, declare Ukraine a no-fly zone enforced by NATO and the United States. We certainly have the capability to do that. The airspace is still contested by the Ukrainians. We could certainly shut down Russian air operations even if we don't directly engage Russian troops on the ground.
So the United States enforcing a no-fly zone over Ukraine at the invitation of the Ukrainian government. They've already asked us to do this, so that's in place. Would it be wise to do that?
To say it, no. I'll just be very direct. No, it would not only not be wise, it would seriously escalate and increase our closeness to being at war directly with Russia. Two nuclear-armed countries. Russia has just put their nuclear deterrent systems in effect, executed those nuclear deterrent systems. Enforcing a no-fly zone directly pits our pilots and our U.S. Air Force against Russian pilots in the Russian Air Force. Enforcement of a no-fly zone would put our pilots in a position of shooting down Russian planes or vice versa. This directly puts two nuclear-armed powers directly against each other and is exactly the wrong thing, the more destructive thing that it should not happen.
So a no-fly zone, unless I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, is a synonym for hot war with Russia.
Yes.
Okay. So that's
not a far-flung. I mean, that is what it is.
That is what it is.
It's not a possibility. It is what it is.
Okay. So if you have a sitting member of Congress calling for hot war with Russia, And I should say, I understand people's frustration. You're watching this on TV. This shouldn't be happening. It is happening. One of many things in the world that's happening that shouldn't be happening, but it's definitely a bad one. We should do something. But they're proposing a direct hot war with Russia. Many journalists are now saying we should be bombing the convoy. The United States should be bombing the convoy of Russian soldiers on the outskirts of Kiev. What is the thinking that gets you to proposing a hot war with Russia over Ukraine?
It is the typical reactive kind of response that we see too often driving our foreign policy. Very short-sighted, reacting in the moment emotionally rather than thinking clearly.
Yes.
And reacting with kind of the feeling of like, well, we got to do something, or we got to look strong, or we got to act tough. But again, not being the leaders that our country needs and saying, okay, let's look at the situation here. What are the short-term and long-term consequences of this specific course of action? Adam Kinzinger should know better. He served in the military for a very long time. That is 101. What are the consequences, both intended and unintended consequences, if we pursue this specific course of action? What exactly are we trying to accomplish? And so for him, I would say, what is your objective that you want to accomplish?
Yes.
I imagine he'd say, well, it's shooting down Russian planes. That's not an objective. That's a tactic in order to accomplish what? Is that gonna defeat Russia? No, it's not. It's going to escalate this war, and it will pit the U.S. military directly against the Russian military, our nuclear arms against their nuclear arms. And whose interest does that serve? What does that accomplish? These are basic questions that should be asked and answered both by politicians proposing them as well as talking heads in the media who very irresponsibly are throwing this out like there is no consequence and that, we'll just go shoot down a few planes. It's not how the world works. That's not how war works. And this is what is so dangerously continuing to push us and propel us closer and closer to this threat of nuclear war, whether it is intentional again or due to some kind of miscalculation. Once you have our planes against their planes, the risk for that is on a moment's notice.
I just have to again note that any system that attacks someone who says what you just said is a very screwed up system that actually is just not working as intended at all.
It's not.
No. It's actually really, really dangerous. So, because what you just said is so obvious and really kind of impossible to attack on the merits, that like, what is the argument against it? But of course, no one argues anymore. They just denounce one another.
And that is the response, right? That's the response to taking a reasoned approach, seeing the reality that sits before you. I mean, I can tell you, I don't have to guess what Adam Kinzinger or someone else would say because they've said it and they'll say it again.
Right. Tool of Putin.
Yeah.
Tool of Putin.
Yeah.
I also have to ask, since you have experienced it firsthand, having your campaign effectively shut down by Google, we understand what's happening on the ground through social media. Mm-hmm. That's how most people, 99% of the population, is seeing this stuff on Facebook or Twitter, seeing a clip of this or that. I don't doubt that Russia actually invaded Ukraine and that it's bad. I mean, that's true. But all the details, like, to what extent are we getting the actual detail? I mean, how manipulated are we right now?
Well, look, I think if we take a step back, I think it's important for everyone to look at the different motives that people may have that come behind the bias of their stories. There is no question in my mind about the tragedy of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the people who are suffering the most from it, both the people in Ukraine, people who are suffering because of these increased sanctions. And so everything else aside, it is the responsibility of our leaders here in this country, leaders of the different countries involved with this, to step up and do what is right and what is best for the people, and bring about an end. Bring about an end to this. No one is going to get everything they want. There's going to have to be compromise by what the United States, by Ukraine, by Russia, by NATO. There will have to be compromise, but it is imperative that they take it upon themselves to make this happen now, to be willing to sit down from across the table from each other and have this conversation that unfortunately and disastrously they've been unwilling to do to this point.
Huh. You mentioned sanctions. So sanctions are supposed to prevent this. I mean, that's what I was told as a television watcher. Sanctions are going to prevent Putin's aggression. Well, they obviously didn't work. But you sounded...
And they haven't worked before. They shouldn't
okay,
be a
so
surprise.
tell us about
They
sanctions. We're very
They haven't
quick,
worked before.
right, to jump on sanctions. What is the point of sanctions?
Too often, I mean, look, too often they're used as a means to say, well, hey, look, it's a politician who wants to say they did something.
Right.
Without, again, thinking through what will the consequences of these sanctions be. And so often we've seen how these sanctions don't actually negatively impact the leaders of these different countries, the people who they're supposedly trying to punish. It's the people in these countries who actually suffer as a result. And what we're seeing as this situation continues to escalate, it's not just the people of Russia who are suffering, but because of how connected we are in this global economy. You know, you've got, I think it was VW in Germany, furloughed 8,000 employees because they cannot continue their operation in building vehicles so long as this conflict continues. And they sent people home saying, we don't know when we're going to be able to get started again. You know, everyone talks about the increased cost of oil and natural gas. That is a reality that will impact us here at home and will impact the world. The cost of wheat, the cost of buckwheat and other grain that people rely on for food around the world. These are all things that are being impacted. Rare ingredients that people don't think of come out of Russia and Ukraine to make semiconductors. Those operations are shutting down. There are and then we're not even talking about the financial institutions and transactions around the world that are being impacted by these sanctions. So this is an area, again, where, you know, you hear President Biden and Kamala Harris saying, well, you know, there is a cost that the American people will pay for freedom. It's not President Biden or Kamala Harris who's going to feel any impact by this. It's, you know, everyday working Americans who look at the gas pump in Hawaii. I can tell you gas is over $5 right now, $5 a gallon. People across the country are seeing the cost of filling up their tanks going up. They're going to start to see the cost of food on the shelves. They're going to start to see the impact showing up in our everyday lives more and more. And again, what is it all for? What is it all for? How does this cost measure in its worth to the American people? Taking this basic cost-benefit analysis that should be done, again, before making these kinds of decisions and deciding what is the right path forward is not something that we've seen happen, not only in this administration, but administrations from Democrats and Republicans who are very quick to take us into conflict and expect us to hold, to pay the price and not ask questions and not hold them accountable for it.
What do people in the military, particularly enlisted, think of all of this stuff? I mean, I know they do their duty, they do what they're told, they obey the chain of command. But since you still serve among them, characterize the view of all this, if you would.
I've had so many conversations over the last several weeks and the last several days from friends of mine who are actively serving, and many of whom are the ones whose phone may ring that they're next to be called up. And very bluntly, they're saying, we should not go to war with Russia. We can't go to war with Russia. This would be the stupidest thing. This would be suicide. This would be, this makes absolutely no sense. And frankly, it's been unequivocal. Again, these are all people who will deploy on a moment's notice.
And they've chosen to be there. So obviously they support the United States. You don't have to serve in the military.
And this, again, this goes back to leadership, the leadership of our country, recognizing that these are the people who have their bags packed. They've got that go bag and they're ready to go. But should they? Is it worth it? Are their lives worth it? I pray that this is something that President Biden and the people around him will consider and take to heart, because to this point, I don't see it.
Does anyone ever call you for counsel on this stuff?
From the White House?
Yeah.
No.
Huh. They should.
I agree. I have a few things to say about it.
No. What about the Pentagon? What about the military and non-uniform leadership of the United States military? Like, they have they're the leaders.
Yeah.
Now they have to obey the president. That's the Constitution requires it. But they can also, give their view, or they can resign. But none are. Why is that?
Our civilian-led leadership of the military is important, and it's critical because it allows the American people to hold those leaders accountable. I have no insight into what counsel our military leaders in the Pentagon are giving to President Biden, so I'm not going to make any presumptions there. But again, I hope that they are spelling out in very, very clear detail of what the effects, the consequences will be, based on all of the possibilities that sit before the president, the decision that they're making. I question why are we sending thousands and thousands of troops to Poland, to Romania, to these other countries, while in the same breath saying, well, no one's going to go to Ukraine, no one's going to go and fight Russia, but we're sending all of these troops on short notice, some of whom I know personally, who told me when the call came, hey, get your bags packed, you got to be ready to go in less than 24 hours. So they're going to go sit there in Poland or Romania or Germany or some other country for what? What are we trying to say here, if not a message of escalation? And where does that escalation lead us? In absolutely the wrong direction, in a very dangerous direction.
Have you heard anyone explain that? I mean, that's a very simple question.
I haven't. Not personally to me, and then certainly not in the public sphere. But these are the kinds of answers that the American people deserve right now, as our friends leave their loved ones behind. What are you doing with our troops? They are our troops, not your troops. What are you doing with our troops? Why are you sending them there? What exactly is your strategy, and what are you trying to accomplish? And I keep coming back to this, Tucker, because it is the central question. What are you trying to accomplish? What is your objective? And does that objective, is it achievable, and does it serve the interests of the American people? And everything that we've seen so far shows that if they have this figured out behind closed doors, they're certainly not sharing it with the American people. But it's our lives, and it's our taxpayer dollars, and it is our country that pays the price.
Last question, do you ever think it's a little weird that they call me a radical, which they often do? Nothing that you've said over the last hour has been even remotely radical. I mean, it's all been completely moderate and restrained and sensible and rooted in common sense and sort of obvious even to non-experts like me. They seem like the radicals.
Yeah.
Do you ever think that?
I don't know if radical is the word I would use, but it just, even saying that it's stupid puts it lightly.
Yeah.
It's dangerous, Tucker.
You feel like to roll the dice on nuclear war?
Seriously, that is the thing that runs through my mind as I watch what's happening on the news, as I'm hearing these different speeches. This is freaking dangerous.
Yeah.
This is dangerous and presents us with that most serious existential threat that we should not have to be thinking of right now. There is no reason for us to be in this place other than a failure of leadership across the board, not only in the United States, but also in these other countries.
Yes.
It is a failure of leadership, and that is the true tragedy of what we are facing here, is that we don't have to be here. This could have been prevented with strong leadership that is not paying attention to the geopolitical chess game of which we are the pawns, but actually saying what is in the best interest of the people, of our respective countries, of the American people, and how do we further those interests? That's what makes me angry. That's what pisses me off, because the decisions that are being made are not being made with that foremost interest at heart.
I don't think there's a single person who's made it to the end of this conversation who is anything but really impressed by what you just said. And I certainly am among them. So thank you.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Thank you.